Now, as I've shared with some of the people earlier today about what's happening in China, I said that I had, a few updates. And unfortunately, the updates in some ways are again sweet and sour, as I was sharing yesterday. If you've been watching the news at all when it comes to China, we are seeing an increase in persecution. Almost all of the top pastors that we work with, or all of the top pastors, almost all of the pastors that we work with have been arrested. Some of them for only a few hours, but all of them have been arrested. Our staff members that work together with Back to Jerusalem have been arrested. In fact, we have one American staff member that when he was arrested with his family and his 3-year-old daughter. He was separated from his family, blindfolded, taken to another location. He and his family were interrogated for 3 days. So we have seen all of our staff that we've been working with for years start to come under observation, and they know that they're being watched, so we've had to let everybody lay low and switch out everyone with new people that we've never really worked with before to keep the work going. But it's getting more and more difficult. For those of you that have been listening to Back to Jerusalem, following Back to Jerusalem, or watching the news at least a little bit, now monitoring is taking place in China on a level that we've never really seen before. By the end of this year, they're expected to have at least one camera for every 2 people in China. And with all of the camera systems that they have, it actually links to social media that has become very popular inside of China. Now, if you've never heard or listened to some of the things that have been going on inside of China as it pertains to social media, let me just give a thumbnail sketch, a brief introduction, so you'll know at least a little bit about what I'm talking about today. If you've never heard of WeChat is anybody that has anything to do with the Chinese are going to know about WeChat. Everybody has used it for a very long time. In many ways, it is the world's first super app. If you've never been exposed to WeChat, basically imagine this. It's Facebook, Twitter, Amazon, Uber, Expedia, all of the different programs that you can think about that you use on your phone. That's WeChat. You can do everything. So for instance, if I want to go to a restaurant and have a meal, I can make a reservation at the restaurant using WeChat. I make a reservation for the taxi to come pick me up, to take me to the restaurant. I send a message to all of my friends to come and join me using WeChat. I go into the restaurant and order my meal, not with a menu. Many restaurants, especially in the bigger cities, don't give you menus anymore. You order your food using WeChat. Then I take a picture of my food and I share it with all my friends using WeChat, like we usually do, right? And then I pay for the meal using WeChat. I then can leave from the location, pay for my parking, I can arrange my ticket, I can rate the restaurant, all of that using WeChat. That sounds kind of cool to have a program that does everything for you. In fact, we've seen it take over small commerce. So when farmers come into town, if they have their goods with them on their wagon, the locals can just walk up with their phone and pay for the goods using just their WeChat account and take the fresh produce together with them. So we've seen that become something inside of China that many people have started to rely on. Now, about 2 years ago, in 2017, China started to do what was called a social credit scoring system, where you had to have a certain score on your credit in order to get certain things in society. So they based this social score on your activity using your social media like WeChat. So if you did things that the government liked, if they thought that you were a trustworthy person, you got a high score. The score is about 350 to 950. It almost works like a credit score that you would get from the bank in the U.S., and there were people that volunteered to become a part of the first system. And the reason that they did that is because there were many benefits. You could get head-of-the-line privileges at the Beijing airport. You could get expedited visas to the EU and Thailand. You could get automatic loans without really having to apply for them. You could get your kids into great schools without even having to worry about, as long as you have a high trustworthy score. But if you have a low trustworthy score, then you would have a problem getting onto the airplane because people would be able to butt in front of you if they have a higher score. going to the hospital. If you've ever been to the hospital inside of China, you get a head-of-the-line privilege if you have a higher score. So that means if you have a low score, everybody that comes into the hospital that has a higher score, they get to go in front of you in line. Well, what would give you a low score? Christians are considered to be untrustworthy. They have a low score. If you friend somebody that is a Christian, that brings your score down. Anybody that has a low score, you don't want to be associated with them. In fact, if you are sitting on the bus or out in public, there is now a program that you can put onto your phone that will tell you anybody that's within a 100-meter radius that has a low score, so that you can make sure that you avoid them. And if you have a low score, it's going to be hard to get your children into certain schools. It will be hard to get your children into certain daycares. So we have already started to see the impact of this. In fact, for the month of July alone, 2019, we saw 2.5 million people that were not able to buy airplane tickets because they had a low social credit score. We saw 900,000 people that were rejected from getting onto the train because they had a low social credit score. We've seen pastors that have had their passports revoked because they have a low social credit score. So we are seeing the impact of observation inside of China like we never really have. That's another aspect of persecution. Banking. We are also seeing challenges with banking. Christian organizations, Christian pastors, people that have been dealing in society for a while to buy Bibles, even though those are not legal. They've still been buying Bibles, printing Bibles, doing certain work within the church, and they've had a budget to work with. Now, with an increasingly cashless society, it's very difficult for the Chinese to be able to carry out many of those projects that they've done in the past. We've seen several of our projects that we've had very difficult to man and run because we are seeing most of our staff members arrested and thrown in jail. So we have 3 Bible schools, 2 language schools. We print Bibles, distribute those. We also print other materials as well, distribute those. We support about 210 evangelists in Western China. Those are becoming more and more difficult to do without people that we know to work with. You know, inside of China now, in order for me to coordinate with anyone, I have to meet them face to face. It's almost like working with the Jersey mob. You can't call anybody on the phone anymore. You have to have a sit down and talk with people face to face before you can do anything, because that's the only secure way that we can think of. And so as we look at how we move forward inside of China, it seems virtually impossible. As we look at how does ministry continue to grow, it looks virtually impossible. But here's the good news. The church continues to grow. This year, we are actually going to see more missionaries sent out from the church in China than we ever have in any previous year. In the last 2 decades that I've lived in China, this is the worst persecution that I have seen. And yet the church continues to grow. And I have to tell you, I mean, in some ways, watching the church get excited about persecution makes me a little bit disgusted. Like my American way, the part of me that was in the military kind of wants to come out and say, you should be a little bit more upset. You should be protesting in the streets. Where's your Samuel Adams? Where's your Paul Revere's? Where's your protest? I mean, we're seeing protests in Hong Kong, but not in mainland China, where the increase of persecution is actually taking place. But my ways are not God's ways. Many of you said amen a little too quickly on that. But we are seeing the church in China get excited about what God is doing. And this new generation is being exposed to persecution that they haven't before. And as we look at what's possible and what's not possible, there is a Bible verse a passage that I just want to read together with you guys today, just for a few minutes to look at what I believe God is saying to us as we're working inside of China. If we look at the book of Matthew, Let me see here. Matthew chapter 14. Matthew chapter 14, verse 13 to 21. My Bible is going to read a little bit different than yours, but I'm not going to spend too much time here because I really want to tell you about the projects that we've been working on inside of China, even in the midst of this persecution and in many of the areas that are even worse off than China. Matthew chapter 14, verse 13 to 21. Here we see a story that I believe has been covered exhaustively in the church. This is a story that many of us have heard many times. But as I was sharing about this morning, sometimes there are things that we read that we don't understand when we first read them. And I think for me, living and working inside of China, this is one of those passages. Verse 15 says this. As evening approached, the disciples came to him and said, "This is a remote place, and it's already getting late. Send the crowds away so that they can go to the villages and buy themselves some food." And Jesus replied, "They do not need to go away. You give them something to eat." "We have here only 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish," they answered. "Okay, bring them to me." And he directed the people to sit down on the grass. Taking the 5 loaves and 2 fish and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and broke the loaves. Then he gave them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to people. They all ate and were satisfied, and the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces that were left over. The number of those who ate was about 5,000 men, besides the women and children. This is one of those passages. This is the only miracle in the Bible, by the way, that's covered by all 4 Gospels. If I was to think of one of the miracles that would have stood out the most to me, I might have thought about maybe the first one with the turning of water into wine, or the last one, especially the last one, right? The raising of Lazarus from the dead. But that's only covered by John. I would have thought about maybe walking on water, but that's only covered by Matthew, Mark, and John. But all 4 authors of the Gospels covered this one miracle. So what was special about it? One of the things that I find interesting is that when God calls his disciples to do something, they look around and look for the tangible things that will be able to assist them in completing the task. And Jesus only asks them one simple question. What do you have? Give it to me. When we look at a task that God has given us, sometimes I think that we try to look at ways that we can rationally complete the task that God has given us. Right? I think that we live in a culture that sometimes bows at the altar of education. And if we do not have the proper degrees, there are certain things that we feel that we just cannot do. I know because I've been in that situation. I remember when I was first called to China, I didn't really want to go because I knew that there were other people that were better suited for China than me. I didn't feel like I was really able to go inside of China. So when I was first solicited with the idea of going to China, I was working for the San Marcos Police Department at the time, going to college full-time, transferring over to San Diego State, and so I said no. But then I found out, it just so happened that I had this 8-month gap. They would not let me start in the spring semester, only the fall semester, so I had this 8-month gap, and my wife and I felt that God was telling us that we need to go and serve in China, at least for this 8 months. I didn't speak the language. I was completely intimidated. When I first moved to China, I hated the food. I ate at McDonald's. This is no joke. I ate at McDonald's every single day for 30 days. I was the original movie of Super Size Me. And I absolutely loved, and I still love McDonald's. 30 days, that's all. You know what my Chinese name is? Eugene. I don't really have a Chinese name. I kept my own name. It's the one my mama gave me. right? So there was nothing about me that wanted to live in China. And I felt that I'm not called for this. God, if you need me to shoot something, I'm your guy. If you need me to run some sort of obstacle course, I'm your guy. But not being on the mission field, not working with the Chinese. But I heard God say, what do you have in your hand? I remember my first time working together with the church in China to go with back to Jerusalem missionaries to a land that they felt called to, Sudan. So I traveled to Sudan to work together with the Chinese, and I remember that I was asked to speak at this meeting in the Nuba Mountains. We flew into this region. We had about 85 pastors with the local Anglican church that all came together. This was before there were two separate nations. And we were there in the Nuba Mountains, and I started to look around. I did 2 tours in the Persian Gulf when I was in the military. Hanging around in tents in the desert actually kind of suited me well. Walking around with a backpack with everything that I own on my back kind of suited me pretty well. I was starting to see that maybe I wasn't as ill prepared for this job as I thought I would be. So I started to speak, and I'm not a very good speaker, but there was this guy in the back. He was in the military with what they call the SPLA at the time. He was a part of this South Sudan resistance. And at the end of the speech, I remember he came forward and he said, "Can I talk with you for a minute?" And he was like Dinka. I don't know how many of you guys know about the Dinka tribes. They're big. This guy blocks some sun, right? He's huge guy. So when he says he wants to talk to you, you just go with it. You just go with him. You don't argue with him. And he said to me, "I would love to bring you to share what you just shared with our troops." And I said, "Okay, that sounds like an amazing opportunity. Where's it at?" And he said, "I can't tell you." And I said, "Well, how long will it take to get there?" He said, "I can't tell you. It's a secret location. Our troops are on the run. They've just engaged in battle. We would love to bring you in and speak with the troops." Like I said, he was a big guy, so I said yes. So I went together with him, not knowing where we were going, not knowing what I was going to talk about, not knowing if I even had anything relevant to share with these guys. But then, as we pulled into this area, it was all wooded. It didn't look like we were driving in any specific area, but it turns out we had just crossed the perimeter of the base, and we started seeing guards step out from behind the trees. We drove on in, and as we drove in, I got out of the vehicle, and I started to see several thousand troops marching in formation to be marched over to a tent where I would be speaking. And I realized that this is kind of in my wheelhouse. God brought me right back to the place where I feel at home the most, working and ministering with military guys. I can remember standing there and trying to identify with them being in the military, and I knew that they wouldn't really understand some things, but there's certain things. I just saw them march in a formation. So I felt that come back, that Sergeant Bach. And I felt that well up in me to be able to connect with them. And I loved it. I absolutely loved it. And I began to minister. And as I was ministering, I could see that there were people connecting, tears coming down their eyes, even though it was a different language. And then Muslims began to come forward and receive Christ. Individuals that had problems with their body, we were praying for them and watching them healed. We started to hand out Bibles, and they were loving this as a brand new treasure. And then I heard again, "What do you have in your hands? Because I'll use it." You know what the most amazing thing about this story is that I feel? I feel that when Jesus gives his disciples a task, they do what I do. What do I have around me? What can I use? How can I do this task that is supernatural that God has given me, but I can meet the obligations that are needed in the natural, right? God says, "I want you to start this project," whatever it is. The first thing that I do in my mind is I think, well, first I need to set a budget. Once I find out how much I need, then I'll do a fundraiser. And once I do a fundraiser, then I'll bring everybody together as we do a dedication ceremony. And when we do a dedication ceremony, if all of my pie charts and flow charts and my plans were correct, I'll go from a full bank account to empty bank accounts. And if I calculated every penny just right, at the end of the day, I will come down to zero. If I did it really well, that I know that I won't overspend my budget, right? That's what I'm thinking. And then we will do a ribbon cutting ceremony on that project. I'll take some Facebook photos to make sure everybody sees how amazing I am of doing this project. But that's my way. That's not God's way. See, my way, I go from full bank accounts to empty bank accounts in order to do what God has called me to do. But that's not what we see here. Jesus takes what it is that the disciples have in their hand. He offers it up with thanks, and then he begins to use it. And what's amazing about the way that God uses it, when we allow him to move through us without trying to control everything, allowing the supernatural to take over, to do that which we can't do. The thing is we start to do the project. You start to hand out the fish. You start to hand out the loaves. You don't know where it's coming from, but every time you reach back, it just keeps coming out. You don't know where it's being supplied from, but it just keeps coming out. And you're able to keep giving and giving and giving. And my way is to go from full to empty, but God's ways is to go from empty hands into full hands. That you can do the projects, and at the end, you still have 12 baskets completely full. I'm seeing that over and over and over inside of China and the other areas that we work in. I'm seeing God use people with what they have in their hands, even when they don't think that they have much in their hands. I can remember we had a project inside of North Korea where we were delivering Bibles. And we had this amazing lady that I was sharing about just briefly yesterday, where we had talked about some of the work that she's done, her stories, in a book called Smuggling Light. And I can remember one night being in northern China, and she gives me a phone call. And she says, Eugene, I've got a friend with me from inside North Korea that I've been discipling. He needs to be smuggled back in to North Korea. Can you help? Can I help smuggle him from China into North Korea? Yes, I can. So I got my buddy. I got about 3 buddies from Alabama in that area. 3 buddies. Daryl, Barney, Ernie. No joke. I met Daryl for the first time inside of North Korea. And straight from Alabama. He's the only he was so amazing to meet. I met him for the first time inside North Korea. He's like, welcome to North Korea. He was the best guy ever. And then we had Ernie. Ernie served time in prison in Texas for drug smuggling. So he's the perfect guy for smuggling, even though he got caught. So the 3 of us get together, and we decide what we're going to do is we're going to drive in 2 different vehicles. And myself and Daryl had actually been in the military before, so we had that kind of pumping in our blood. Daryl was an Army Ranger, and so as we started working together, he was in car number 1 and I was in car number 2. And so what we did is we told the guy, we went and we met with this brother. He had been discipled for a few weeks by this amazing sister. She had given him Bibles and this whole bag of materials to take back to the church inside of North Korea. And so he's never met us before. He's never met Americans before. So he was nervous, justly so. And so we sit down and we're using little trucks from one of our friends' children. And we're showing him how we're going to drive. And what we said was, this was our genius plan. We're going to drive along the river at night, blacked out. And if we see the police and they try to stop us, car number 1 is going to ram them. Car number 2, which will have this brother in it, is going to go to a different area, drop him off, and try to get him across the river fast. This guy's listening to this like, what are these people talking about? And then I saw him get emotional. And he said, you guys are going to risk this for me? Why? Why would you do that? And we got the opportunity to explain to him, brother, you might be North Korean, we might be American, we might be in China, but once you gave your life, we are now a part of the same family. I no longer take my refuge in an American passport. I take my refuge in my citizenship in the kingdom of heaven. And what is amazing is that brother, even though we have completely different backgrounds, we have a completely different culture, completely different language, I share more in common with him than I do many of the people in this city that do not know Christ. I can sit beside somebody on an airplane that shares the same citizenship, likes the same food, speaks the same language, but if they're not a believer, our value systems are completely different. And the more I become like Christ, the more he becomes like Christ, the closer we are in our thinking and the way that we act. So as we were looking at to get this brother across into North Korea, it was not an easy task. I can tell you that night we never saw any police, thank goodness for that. We didn't see any police, but what we did see was not a good thing. You see, we felt high speed, low drag. Daryl and I felt like we were going back in the day. We're sitting in the vehicle. Everything is dark. We're trying to move as quietly as possible up to the river. And then I see this North Korean brother that we're trying to help sneak into North Korea pull out a floaty device that is, no joke, hot pink with purple elephants. All of our ideas of being high-speed, low-drag military were thrown completely out the window with that floaty device. And we had to watch him go across the river with all of those goods on this hot pink with purple elephants floating device. But God has given us so many opportunities. He knew the steps that I was going to take long before I took them. And He arranged them to be compatible for my calling. Even though I did not see it, He already prearranged it. So I can remember working together with the Chinese. And we were looking at putting together a Bible school in the Philippines for the Chinese. And so we have this training center in the Philippines that's broken down into several parts. And we were talking to the Chinese about what they need. It's not your typical Bible school. It's about a year long, but instead of taking exams of, trying to regurgitate information, at this school, the people actually go out and they minister to unreached tribes. They come back, they talk about what went right, what went wrong, what they can do better, and they continue to do that over and over again, working with local pastors. So I'm working together with the Chinese, and I'm asking them, what can we add to this that you guys would need? And he said, well, we could really use a system that can teach people how to answer questions at immigration. Well, it just so happens that I've had interrogation training. Now, it's not exactly immigration, but we feel let's add an interrogation element to our Bible school. And I think we're the only Bible school that I know of that actually our students go through interrogation, and they don't know it. They don't know, it's not a part of the syllabus. Nobody's allowed to tell them that it's coming. And so what we do is for about 2 days and 2 nights, they go through sleep deprivation and food deprivation, and they think that they're just busy. And then I work together with the local police department, and at nighttime, we go into the room with the police, we pull them out and say, we have a simple question. They don't see me. And we've set up this interrogation room with a camera and some chairs, and we're working with the local police department, and the police go and they get the students out of their bed, they bring them to this station, and they begin to question them. They say, it's just very simple. We're sorry that we have to wake you up. It just has to do with immigration. And then we begin to question them and wear them down. And we go throughout the entire evening. We go until about 6, 7 o'clock in the morning before I finally walk out and say, calm down, don't worry, this is only a part of the training. The people that do the best are individuals that you would never imagine. We bring in certain people and they start to go through questioning, but I can remember today that the toughest nut to crack was this little young 18-year-old Chinese girl. And she was about that big. And she was tenacious, but tenacious not in a way that she made a big presence. She was tenacious and you couldn't change her mind, and she was so sweet that she rolled over you. And so she walked into the interrogation room, and the way that we had the camera set up is that the camera was at the back part. We had a chair on one side that we would lead the student to, and then the police would sit, and I could watch the back of the police, and then I would bring them out and coach them, and then they would go back in, and I was able to watch, and they couldn't see me. And so they brought this little young girl in, and instead of sitting where she was supposed to, she sits in the interrogator chair. And the interrogator said, no, that's my seat. You're supposed to sit there. And she goes, no, I'm okay. And he said, no, you need to move over there. And she goes, no, I'm fine. And she would not move. She was not being rude. She was not being belligerent. She just would not move. The police didn't know what to do. So they came and talked to me, and they said, what do we do? I said, tell her to move. You're the police. And they went back. They told her to move. She still didn't move. She never moved. We had to do the interrogation in reverse. So the entire time they're asking her questions, and she says, I have to go use the restroom. And they came back and they said, what do we do? And I said, we're going to use that for our advantage. That's going to be a part of the interrogation. She cannot use the restroom. They said, okay. We went on and on and on, and every time they kept talking, she kept saying, got to use the restroom. At the end, when I finally walked in and I said, never mind, this is just training. You can calm down, and if you have to use the restroom, you can go use it now. She's like, I never had to use the restroom. She was going to make a run for it. I was completely amazed. And then we grabbed pastors from China that have been arrested, that have been tortured, that have been thrown in prison. And they sit with the students, and we watch the videos, and we talk about what went right, what went wrong. And then the pastors use that experience to share about how they were able to protect their friends as their friends made a run. What do you have in your hands? Because you might not think it's much, but God can use it. And if you step out, you will be surprised at the opportunities where when you finally are using them to complete the calling that God has given you, to look back and be like, holy cow, that had been arranged all along. It is absolutely phenomenal. Sometimes whenever I speak at mission conferences, I have people that do certain jobs that they think, this job, what I'm doing, there's really nothing that I could do on the mission field. I had one guy come to me and he said, I would love to serve, but I just don't know where to start. I don't know what I would be good at. I'm a truck driver. Today we have a Back to Jerusalem trucking company. We brought him to China. We had him train our guys, and we went. This is no joke. Somebody came to me. They said, I don't really have any background. I don't have any experience. I don't know how I could serve. It turns out that in their free time, they made candles. So we started a candle making company. What do you have in your hands? Because God can use it. And here's the thing. Sometimes I'm like, okay, God, that's great. You have showed me examples where you can take what it is that I've done before, something that I have, 2 loaves or 5 loaves and 2 fish, and you can use that. But what about when I have nothing? What about when I have nothing in my hand? There's another story about God asking somebody, what do you have in your hand? Exodus chapter 4. Moses, what do you have? After all of the excuses that Moses is giving of why he can't be used, he's asked, Moses, what do you have in your hand? Quite literally, a stick. I have to be careful about this when I'm preaching inside of Chinese, inside of China, because I've shared about this message before with Moses, and I've used the word gun, which sounds very much like staff in Chinese. And it's a completely different message when I say that, Moses, what do you have in your hand? A gun. But let's not forget, Moses had another hand. Moses had another hand, and God said, Moses, take your other hand, your empty one, put it in your cloak, pull it out. Moses, I'll use that. That's the kind of God that we serve. What do you have in your hand? He will use it. If you have nothing, He will use it. One of my favorite messages is there's this pastor inside of China. I was not there, but somebody told me about this pastor, and I worked with him even though I was not there at this specific meeting. And the offering plate was passed around the meeting place as they were gathering up funds to send out a Back to Jerusalem missionary into Egypt. And this pastor, who had nothing to give, put the basket on the ground and stepped in it. Said, I don't have anything to give, but I give myself. You might think that you don't have anything, but even with the empty hand, God can use it. And I'm happy about that. There's nobody here happier about that than me, because I have some empty hands. And so when I'm working together with the Chinese in different areas, I find myself on a regular basis way out of my depth. I fake it by watching YouTube videos and learning about things that I don't know how to do prior to actually doing them. But one of the things that has been really exciting for us is working together with the Chinese to create items that can be used in closed nations. Now, one of those items that we have created is a small little digital Bible that is a digital reader, and it's about the size of a credit card, and it doesn't look anything special. I mean, who cares about a digital reader, right? I mean, most of us have mobile phones right now that have digital readers. We can read all day on our digital mobile phone. But our reader, I promise, is nothing like you've ever seen, in the way that you can use it for about 5 to 7 years without changing the battery or charging the battery. Take that, Apple. So we started to use these items inside of North Korea. Until I traveled together with our pastor friend of mine. I shared a little bit about him this morning, Pastor Joshua. Pastor Joshua, like I said this morning, has a little small church of only about 4 million believers. And as we went into Iraq, I can remember handing out aid when ISIS had hit in 2014 and 15. We were there handing out blankets and tents and food and water and oil. And one evening, after we'd been doing a day of distribution, myself and the pastor, we climbed up to the top of this mountain, and from the top of the mountain of this village, we could oversee the lights of Mosul. And as we were looking at the lights of Mosul, I can remember the pastor saying to me, "What are we doing to reach ISIS?" Now, my background, as I've shared, is in the U.S. Marine Corps. I had a top 10 list of the things I would love to deliver to ISIS. The gospel was not among them. But as he started to talk and we began to share, I realized he was looking at things in a completely different way. What if within ISIS there's an apostle Paul that's persecuting Christians today and has yet to have his Damascus experience? What if instead of sending soldiers into this area to fight ISIS, we begin to send missionaries, carriers of the message of the living God? What if, instead of sending bombs, we begin to send Bibles? So I thought, okay, that sounds fun in theory. How do we do it? We started talking about this. We were at a meeting in Harrisburg, actually. We were at a meeting in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. And out of nowhere, this big caravan of Amish began to show up. I mean, horse and buggy traffic jams all over the place. And these group of Amish guys came up and they asked me, how can we be involved in what's happening in Iraq? We want to join. That was laughable. What? You don't even have electricity. You can't get on a plane and fly over to Iraq. And they said, for the gospel, we will. And as I started to work with them in Iraq, I started to realize this makes sense. These guys are living in a place with no electricity. They're wearing all black. They got long beards. They look like Al-Qaeda. They fit in perfectly. And believe it or not, we were able to bring in drones together with them. And the drones, we strapped these small little credit card Bibles to the bottom. And we began to fly over ISIS territory and drop Bibles into their cities. And we were able to put a video camera on the drone so that we could record it. Would you guys like to see it? If only I would have brought it. Yes, if we can play video number 3, please. Now, to some of you more religious people, I have to apologize for the soundtrack. Because as we started to play like worship music, I was looking at this, I was like, I want to feel like we are in battle. And then somebody said, but that's a worldly song. And I said, so what? Do you know how many things the world has stolen from the Christians and polluted it and made it worse? Let's steal something from their camp and use it for our purposes. So as we began to work on that project, one of the things that we realized is that we could only deliver a few of those Bibles. We didn't have a payload big enough to carry more. So we decided, let's make smaller Bibles. Now, how many people here have seen the Jason Bourne series movies? Okay, I haven't because I'm a Christian. But in those movies, right, there's a very first one, this guy, he's pulled out of the water, and they begin to pull bullets out of his skin, and they find this little bitty device that when they touch it, it makes a projection of a bank account onto the wall. And I saw that, and I thought, why can't we build a Bible like that? We got this guy, he's from Holland. He's an amazing code writer. We keep him in a basement. We feed him Doritos from time to time, and he writes code for us and invents many of the things that we need for the field. So we began to work on a Bible about the size of a pill, and that's it right there. This Bible right here has all of the books from Genesis to Revelation. You do not need to charge the battery or change the battery for a year and a half. It illuminates the air in front of your face so you can read the entire Bible. And if you have people behind you, up to about, I've had 20 people read it with me, you can read from this device. The great thing about working and living in China is we make everything, so why not use it for the kingdom? And if we don't make it, we will take it, find out how it's made, reverse engineer it, and build it ourselves. The great thing about this little device is that if somebody walks in and you're found with it, you could easily just swallow it. Now, we can't tell you it comes out looking the same as it went in, but we can tell you that you will be filled with God's word. Now, I am really excited about Alabaster Group. Alabaster Group, last year I was able to share a little bit with them, and I told them about this crazy idea that we had. We have been seeing so many places where monitoring is taking place, like I was telling you about with WeChat, and I thought to myself, why is it that we as a church are always playing defense. Why can't, for once, why can't we be on the offense? Instead of worrying about being attacked, why can't we be the one doing the attack? You know, in World War II, I don't know if you guys knew about this or not, but the Japanese actually invented a submarine that would hold an airplane inside. It was an airplane that could be assembled, and it had a runway on top of the submarine, and they would surface close to the west coast of the United States, put the plane on top, and allow the plane to go in and drop bombs on mainland U.S. If you haven't heard about that, you can look it up. It actually happened in Oregon. The Japanese were able to bomb more than just Pearl Harbor. They bombed the mainland of the part of the U.S. But Roosevelt did not let the American people know. Why? Because he knew that to win this battle, we need to stay on the offense in the Asian theater and the European theater. If people find out what's happening, there'll be panic, and we'll bring all the troops home, and we'll lose this war. I think as Christians, we're bringing all the troops home, and we're not pushing the battle into the enemy's territory. So we thought, why can't we for once go into the enemy's territory? So last year, when I was here with Alabaster, I was sharing, and I thought, if there's anybody here that can write code, that are game designers, maybe gamers, we would love to have you to come and join us for a hackers conference. And we hosted a hackers conference for the first time this year. And we decided, let's not make it a meeting where, you know, there's a bunch of speaking. And let's go to a cabin up in the mountains, beanbags all around, and let's see what happens. We had a guy here, Tom. Tom, where are you at? Tom was with us. So Tom was one of the volunteers that came and joined us. And so we just put out a call, and we said, okay, we're going to try to keep it to about 15 people to see what we can do to start changing the battlefield electronically in the area between China and Jerusalem. And so as we are working together, we put this call out, and we opened it up to about 15 people at the most. We filled up pretty quick, and I said, okay, well, we're cutting off there. But then we started getting these amazing resumes. I'm like, no, dude, he's coming. That one, I don't care. Get a bigger cabin, that one's coming. And then another one came. I was like, no, he's coming. Definitely, he's coming. We had like 40, 50 people there from the CIA. We had people there from the State Department. We had one of the guys that's in charge of intelligence for all of the Korean Peninsula. We had a guy that's in charge for cyber warfare for Andrews Air Force Base. We had the typical guy from mom's basement that hasn't taken a shower in a while and comes to the meetings in his pajamas. But it was amazing to begin to see these guys who felt like, I don't stand on stage. I don't minister at Sunday schools. What can I do for the kingdom? And I heard God saying, what do you have in your hands? Because I can use it. And if they didn't hear God say that, they definitely heard me say that. Because as they were sitting in the living room and we began to put things together, I was saying, what do you have in your hands? Because we can use it. Now, as we looked at all the different things that we were putting together, one of the things that I said, and actually before we even started, and I'll start to close up here. Before we even started, Tom can tell you, nobody knew anybody. And I thought, I'm not going to introduce myself or anybody here. I'm just going to put everybody into teams of 5. It was morning time on the very first day, and I put up a map of the 1040 window. And I took out all the easy countries like China and India, just the places like Afghanistan and Kyrgyzstan and Iran and Yemen and Somalia. These places we left on that map. And then I told them, for the first hour, I want you, in any way possible, connect with people in any one of those countries. And in each team, we have a whiteboard, and we're going to do a competition. I know that it sounds sacrilege to do a competition, but this was the competition. For every person that you connect with, you get a point. If you start a dialogue, for every part of that dialogue, you get a point for every time they respond back. You share the gospel, 100 points. You bring somebody to Christ, game over. And it was amazing to see what we could do in that one living room before we started to do any of our project planning. It was so funny to hear some of them say, what about phone calls? And I was like, really? We're at a hackers conference. You're going to ask me about cheating? There's no cheating at a hackers conference. Any way you can connect with people and share the gospel and bring them to Christ, let's do it. Game on. And we started keeping score, and it was a blast. We had a really good time, opened up everybody's mind, and our first thought was, instead of chasing the enemy and trying to create bandages for the problems that he's made, let's come up with new gadgets that have never been invented before, and let's start making the enemy have to react of what we are doing. Let's make the enemy start to think, how can we stop what they are doing? Whenever you look at what God is doing, I think it's very important for one major thing. Any gift that you have has to be released to reach the lost. It's your obligation. And it's your lifeline. If you don't, you die. You know, there's two main bodies of water in Israel. You have the Sea of Galilee, just a little bit north of the Dead Sea. The Jordan River feeds both. They're both fed by the same stream, the same water, coming from the Gaian Mountain area. You have the Jordan River, it comes down into the Sea of Galilee. And the Sea of Galilee is teeming with life. Fish, communities, it's clean water. It's a great environment to be in. But then you go to the Dead Sea. Almost no houses around there. There's almost no life living inside of that water. Same water source, what's the difference? The water source of the Sea of Galilee that's teeming with life, everything that flows in freely flows out. And it allows the life to be sustained. But everything that flows into the Dead Sea is trapped in the Dead Sea. There's no outlet for that which is coming in. And one of the problems that I see with a lot of us Christians is we, week after week, allow amazing waters of living water to flow into our lives, but then there's no outlet for it to go out. And this is what I love about working together with the Back to Jerusalem missionaries. What do you have in your hand? And they ask me, I promise I will end on this. They ask me, what would you like to do that you think is impossible? And I said, I would love to create a social media site that we could use in closed countries that wouldn't be shut down like, Facebook. What if we had an alternative to what we are seeing now as a more controlled, manipulated system? What if we had a social media, not for Christians, but an open platform for everyone that could be used in closed nations? Our team got together. They began to work on it. Next month in India and Vietnam, we are launching to the churches there, dingdash.com, a social media site that is open and cannot be stopped by the government because we have a way of being able to move it around. It's an amazing setup, and it is possible. What do you have in your hands? I want to thank you guys so much for allowing me to speak. And thank you to Alabaster. Thank you so much, Daniel. I really appreciate it, brother.